let me know and I can see if I can figure that out. But either way, I am recording.
Hey, Morgan, this is Shannon O'Brien. It says when I try to record, please ask the host to give you permission to record.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can figure that out right now.
Same here, Morgan from Mahoney. Thank you.
Thanks, Morgan. It's Shannon. That worked.
Okay, perfect. I just gave everyone that authority, but let me know if it didn't work for anyone. And we'll get started in just a minute here. Hi, Mayor.
Hi.
We are ready to get started. We will go ahead and just start taking questions right off the bat. So Mahoney, you're top of my list. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for making this available.
Second, let me just start with a few affirmative comments because I do want to share some level of excitement and interest in what has happened today. First of all, I want to make sure I give tremendous thanks to Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, congressional Democrats generally, Congresswoman Sharice Davids on the Kansas side, for making sure we have this opportunity. $195 million in Kansas City will be a game changer, and we'll be responsible with it as well. We know there are limits as to where this money can go, but we also know that this addresses what was going to be a crisis in our local government response, not just to COVID-19, but also on how we fund the basic services Kansas Cityans expect. So this helps renters and tenants and frontline workers and our city employees and so many more. So that's why we're pumped. I look forward to talking more about our limits. And so, Michael, sorry to cut you off.
Not at all. Not at all. Mayor, you sort of walk me into that question here. Not all of this is not like a grant that is suddenly getting dropped into the city's lap. You're not even getting all this money all at once. This is sequential spending spread out over several years. How much do you understand you are getting that can address your budget situation first and foremost?
So we understand that we're going to be receiving $195,470,000. As you rightly noted, that will be split in two separate buckets or pots. Pot one will be $97,735,000. So we're really, I think, starting with how do we make plans in that area. And as you know, Michael, there are limits as to where we can spend that money. Those limits include the fact that the money can only be used for purposes that relate to responding to the COVID-19 public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. Its negative economic impacts are a somewhat broader category. And as you might note, there are lots of things in Kansas City that have resulted from the fact that we have fewer revenues from convention and tourism taxes. We have an arena tax that is funded by rental cars, something that wasn't funded at all this year. So it can be used for both response to COVID-19 or its economic fallouts, also for provision of government services, to the extent of the reduction in revenue made it unable for us to do any number of things. That would include perhaps some of our housing initiatives, among other items. And then importantly, it allows us to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So those are the sorts of things we can do. What you will not see us doing, Michael, are things like trying to put money into pension funds. That's not a permitted use. We won't put money into tax incentives or reductions. So this isn't just a broad-based corporate economic development type of thing. This is going to be about, one, how do we get vaccines to people? How do we get shots in arms? Two, how do we make sure that we're looking at how we can refund and refill our reserves? As you all reported, we spent $50 million in cash reserves last year. We'd like to not only replenish those funds, but also make sure that we build up future reserves to get us back on good financial footing for Kansas City, Missouri. And then more than anything, we're going to make sure that we stand up for our workers, our workforce, our frontline workers, and delivery of basic services in Kansas City. So that's where it is. It's broad, but it is limited. And we will be as responsible as we possibly can. You will still see us debating a Kansas City, Missouri budget next week. Our $1.7 billion budget still needs to be passed by the end of March. We likely won't even have our first tranche of money in yet. So we're planning to be as responsible as we can.
Mayor, do you believe that you are entitled to any additional funds from either Jackson County, Clay County, or Platte County?
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. I mean, look, here's the deal that happened with the CARES Act. That money was meant to get back to local governments that are providing core basic services for their constituents. In Kansas City, Missouri, we have our own health department. In Kansas City, Missouri, our frontline workers were doing a lot through this pandemic and responding to a crisis. Every year, Kansas City, Missouri, for example, bills $40 million in ambulance rides, but can only get paid for about $20 million. So we're losing $20 million a year. That's largely because there are some of low incomes and others where we're just not getting paid ever. Our CARES Act funds were supposed to help assist those types of efforts this year. And because we had to have political negotiations that went through a number of different levels, the state of Missouri in some situations, the counties and others, we were not able to spend money, I think to the extent we needed to address the crisis. And you saw us go deeply into reserves, probably more than any other jurisdiction around here. I mean, when people are done, Kansas City is not only the largest city in Missouri, it's the largest city in this region. It's by a few states. And so we should be able to actually come up with good answers for how we address these things. Particularly on the Jackson County point, we received $31.6 million. As you all know, we should have received tens of millions of dollars more. A lowball estimate is $55 million at least. A higher one I saw earlier was about $80 million that we should have been able to receive from Jackson County. And so we did not. Perhaps it's water under the bridge. I think that we would still like to see those level of resources in Kansas City. We're glad that Congress saw fit to allow money to go directly to the cities because it's going to allow us to directly help people and all those things that you've all been reporting on. How do we take care of our unhoused, our homeless population? How do we pay for our frontline workers? How do we make sure that there's still a convention business in any way here in Kansas City and in the region? Visit KC, the regional tourism asset, has had its budget cut by millions because we don't have money coming in. This is why these resources are so important. I wish we could have gotten them earlier, but you know what? I'm glad we have President Biden in place. I'm glad that Congressman Cleaver was part of this all, and we'll try to do what we can now with what we have.
Thank you.
Viva, we'll go you next with Brian on deck.
Thank you. Mayor, I'm wondering, to what extent will the city budget reflect the passage of this bill?
You know, I don't think the city budget, if we're being responsible, should reflect the passage of this at all. This is not money that we have yet. And so not unlike starting a new job and knowing that there are opportunities ahead, you shouldn't cash the checks before you have them. I think we will continue to look at the challenges to the city budget. We will continue to try to make sure, particularly not just that we're addressing long-term issues and concerns, but that we're addressing the trends in Kansas City that were in some ways not the direction that we needed to. There are plans for changes in Kansas City's budget. Some of that relates to the fact that we needed to hold some departments and areas more accountable, that we needed to not see the same expenditures in the same areas. And so the way I think that we'll see it is when we get this money, which can take as short as 2 weeks or up to 2 months in that first tranche of money we're getting, then you will likely see, all right, where can we fill in past need and past issues? I imagine there will be a robust debate among city council as to what we should do first. But I think it's only responsible for us to say, let's make sure we're addressing a lot of the issues that we had in terms of spending into our reserves, making sure we have future reserves, because we're already, right, getting evaluated as a credit rating basis. We do not want our bond obligations to increase, to have all types of issues, because we saw this money and we just started spending it like wild. We're going to make sure that we're as responsible as possible as we get through this. And I think if you're looking at what area of local government will we spend money on, I think it is key that we continue to address our COVID-19 response. We have a lot of vaccine clinics, small clinics and others, that have no money to support their vaccination efforts, that have no real support for how we market and get these vaccines out to people, and particularly as the state of Missouri now actually seems to understand the necessity for vaccination events en masse in Kansas City. I want to make sure that we're prepared to do our part to make sure it gets done.
Is it my turn, Morgan? I'm going to jump in line either way.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for doing this. Wanted to ask you about the cut to police. You've alluded to that you're moving forward with the budget process as planned. When we spoke the other week, you blamed those cuts on the fact that you hadn't gotten congressional aid. Now that you're going to get it, are you able to go and replenish that later? Another question I'd have, I'll just throw up at the same time, is can you respond to the Republican criticism to the bill? You've probably heard it, that claims that this bill is either pork or a blue state bailout, and as a mayor in a red state. Can you respond to that?
As I told you a few weeks ago, my point still stands. It is disappointing, frustrating, hypocritical for people who spent a whole summer lecturing mayors and others on backing the blue, on standing up for our police, to have not supported a bill that pays for policing, that pays for firefighter services, that pays for paramedics, that pays for a response to COVID-19. What it shows me is that the entire summer of dialogue that we heard from the right was nothing but empty rhetoric. Because when it came time to literally pay the bills, to stand up for people being able to keep their jobs, Republicans in the United States Senate, Republicans in the United States House were nowhere to be found. And, I don't say that lightly, but I strongly disagree with the voting decision made by the two senators from the state of Missouri, the two senators from the state of Kansas, and most of the congressional delegations from both states. I've had folks wondering, how can we ever get to new recruiting classes? How can we address policing issues? How can we do any of these things? And they had no answer other than just saying, well, yeah, you're all just bad and this is a blue state bailout or something of the sort. Look, I understand rhetoric as well as everybody else, but it is complete and utter malarkey to suggest that in any way city irresponsibility, state irresponsibility led to the fiscal challenges at issue. People are not going to 2,000 or 3,000 person conventions right now, and they probably won't for a little while. Consumer behavior has changed dramatically in a way that it has probably never changed in our entire lives. And cities have borne the brunt in cost in a number of different ways, helping to address issues relating to social services that still need to be provided, still having roads to provide, still having salaries to pay, right? Those are the sorts of things and reasons why this money was important, why the Democrats and the right, why the majority of American people, the vast majority of American people, support this relief plan. And that's why I'm glad to see it being signed by the president later this week, particularly on the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. As I noted in my response to Aviva, I'm not cashing checks until we have them. And until we have this check, we continue to find ourselves in a position of budget crisis. And I think it continues to be important for Kansas City to make sure that we pass a budget that reflects our fiscal reality today, or at least our fiscal reality at the end of March. To the extent that at the beginning of April, we're able to replenish funds in a number of different ways. The hierarchy that I expressed, I think still needs to be what we follow, which is step one. How do you address the reserves that you've depleted? I've talked to a number of city council members who share that same view, and making sure that we're actually making sure that we're not leading to some sort of fiscal instability long term. So that's going to be step one, cause one for us. Step two, cause two, is making sure that we address, actually I flipped that. Step one is making sure we address COVID-19 or COVID-19 crisis, helping to support vaccinations. Step two is the fiscal calamity in which we find ourselves, making sure we're able to address it responsibly. Step three is how do we make sure that we're taking care of our frontline workers, our city staff, our city budget. And so I do believe that from that, we'll be able to address issues as it relates to long-term costs on policing. We have not had new Kansas City, Missouri Police Department classes for an entire year. I think it will be important for us to get it back, but that's something that we will be debating in a supplemental budget process. But I think that this gives us hope in saying that there's a way that we can actually make sure we fund these things. We'll continue, though, to ask every department to be as accountable as it possibly can be, to not have bloated administrative expenses, ironically, to do the very things the Republicans claim that we have not done, which this city in this budget, both the one that will be debated in 2 weeks, but also in our mid-year budget adjustment, have already done with a number of departments, including the Kansas City Police Department, and making sure that we're cutting out administrative expenses, consultants, lobbyists, and so many more. So we'll continue to do that. But no, I think we will have a chance in a few months to evaluate ways that we can address long-term budget needs, and that will include public safety questions.
Carolina, and then Shannon on deck, and whoever we have from 41 rounding us out.
Hi, Mayor. I spoke with a woman today, and she was telling me that she does not qualify for the stimulus payment, an issue with her taxes. So I know that the city is going to be kind of funneling some money to different organizations that then will then be able to assist the community. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of trickle down money?
Well, the city absolutely plans in the same way that we did with CARES Act funds. And you may remember from our CARES Act discussion, the city gave millions of dollars to small businesses in Kansas City, gave millions of dollars to renters and others who needed social services support. And we will continue to do the same thing with this money. A larger amount of money that comes directly to the city, allows us within the confines of federal law to make sure that we'll continue to support small businesses, we'll continue to support our renters, we'll continue to support those who find themselves in economic straits right now, tough economic straits right now. And so you can expect to hear from us more on that. We were the first local government in this region to build up a small business relief plan. We were the first local government in this region to come up with support in a broad-based manner for our tenants and so many others. And I think that the woman you talked to can rest assured that if she is in Kansas City, Missouri, that we're going to lead again in Missouri and in our region in making sure that we have ways to help people through this crisis. This is not money that is going to pay anybody's salary anew. This is not money for administrators or consultants or anything like that. This is money that is going to make sure that we stay fiscally responsible and that we help people who have been negatively impacted by COVID-19. And that's exactly what we'll do.
Hey, Mayor, it's Shannon. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Hey, so you've answered a couple of my questions already, but the question I still have is, back a couple of weeks ago when we were talking, when the police department had said it was critical about the budget and how much they were getting and saying that they weren't going to be able to have a class and that it negatively impacting them. At the time, you thought you were going to get $180 million and said that some of that money would be spent for the police department. Has that changed?
No. I mean, I think my viewpoint remains the same, which is that out of $195 million, I think there will be important funds that we use for all frontline workers. And that includes hiring EMTs, but being responsible with how you do it. That includes responsibility with the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. What I've said to Brian and others before is exactly the case at issue here, which is step one, COVID-19 response, make sure we can pay for vaccines, make sure we can get people safe, make sure we can responsibly reopen in Kansas City. Step two, address long-term budgetary challenges that we have incurred from this year. So replenishing your reserves because we didn't have the revenues coming in, making sure we have a reserve, including for those that may be looking for earnings tax refunds based on changes this year and work from home. And then following that, as federal law actually lays out, making sure then as point three, we're actually looking to, all right, how do we address programmatic needs and programmatic cuts we've had to make because we didn't have revenues relating to the COVID-19 crisis. The Kansas City Police Department is a significant part of our budget, about 40%, I believe, of our general fund itself. And therefore, they will be a significant part in what solutions we look to going forward. What I cannot answer today is how much that looks like, what that is exactly. Is it an elimination of any cut at all? I don't know that. And that's something that we're going to go through a legislative process for. But I do think that it's important for us to get back to having recruiting classes someday. I do think it's important for us to make sure in every city department that we have requisite staff to be able to address the basic services needs that we have in Kansas City. We probably need to hire a few people in the health department to help address this crisis. So those are the sorts of things. But I'll tell you this: had Republicans in Congress had their way and this money wasn't getting here, then not only would the police department be looking at the $11.8 million cuts that we have, but likely might be looking at greater cuts. And I know there are council proposals to that effect that we're looking to cut the police budget by as much as $30 million. I think this helps us answer those very real policy questions, which some of my colleagues are saying, we don't have the money, even for the $11.8 million cut, right? We can't sustain that. We needed bigger ones. This helps us avoid that. And that's why I think when you're looking at who actually is supporting government workers of all types, who's actually supporting our economy, I give huge props to Emmanuel Cleaver. I'm not sure I give huge props to, some of the others in our congressional delegation who have not stepped up to support Missouri cities.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I know you've said the money is going to be spent, here, there, and other places. Do you have any idea of what percentage of the budget is going to be spent in those places? Have those conversations happened?
No, I can't say in a promise yet. I mean, I think the way that these things tend to go is that we will go through a supplemental budget process. There will be great discussion on it. I do think there's a consensus in City Council that we want to make sure that we address our spending of our cash reserves last year. Spending $50 million in reserves is not a great thing. We had $100 million in reserves. The plan for this year's budget was to dip into them again. So making sure that we right size those is going to be vital. But look, I will say this. There are a lot of groups that depend on Kansas City, Missouri government for funding, ranging from the Kansas City Zoo to the Kansas City Police Department to a number of shelters, social services agencies. I will note that our regional assets, not just Kansas City, Missouri assets, we're in a much better position now to help address some funding concerns next year with receiving stimulus funds than we would have been otherwise. And so that's why I'm elated about what we've seen. I'm also elated about the fact that, as Carolina notes, we have a way to help people, working people in our city, non-working people in our city. And that's what's going to be important. So the direct funding to Missouri and Kansas City families, the direct funding for those with children, the direct funding and a number of different other resources, including mass transportation systems, is the sort of thing that's helpful for us. And that's where we are. But specifics at this point, we won't know until we have the money. You'll see a Kansas City ordinance. You'll probably see another debate on it. We just know that we're happy to be able to even talk about ways that we can support our frontline workers, healthcare, and so many other important issues in Kansas City.
Thank you.
Is there anything for KSHB? No microphone capabilities. Apologies. I'm just seeing yours. Okay. What are your thoughts on further federal assistance through this pandemic recovery process? Great question, actually. Do you believe another stimulus package may be needed? I believe there's been significant discussion about a stimulus as it relates to infrastructure investments. That continues to be important. We need to get people back to work. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti and Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher about this very topic. It's my view that this is actually one of many steps in the president's efforts to make sure that cities, our country, can get back on its feet, and I fully support it. It is odd that deficits only become an issue when you're back in a Democratic administration, but nevertheless, I think these are going to be important things that lead to significant consumer spending. These are important things that will lead to more jobs in places like Kansas City, and that's why I'm fully in support of those efforts. And we're working with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. As you may remember, I'm a chair of a subcommittee on the U.S. Conference of Mayors relating to transportation and public transportation. We will be lobbying and I'm not a lobbyist, but at least I'll be supporting our efforts to make sure that we get more money to America's cities. And I think this is, in some ways, hopefully just the beginning, and how we can bring more stimulating activities, more jobs, more infrastructure investments to Kansas City and points beyond.
Mayor, any final thoughts for me before we head out of here?
I am all good. Thank you, Morgan.
Okay, thanks, guys. You know how to find us. Bye.
Ciao.